Hi, Violet. Welcome. I can't hear you. You've gone quiet.
What's up? You're so
What's
far
up?
into
What's up?
how
What's
you
up?
lost sense of sound.
All right. Cool. So we're talking to two different people from three people. I'm one of the people, and I'm in the same town as Violet, but Char is on the whole other side of the world tell us where you're at.
I'm in the Byron Bay area in Australia, New South
Okay.
Wales. Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we just thought it would be fun to have a discussion and talk about whatever comes up. Char has a YouTube channel called, what is it called?
Char Awakening.
Char Awakening, Shar Awakening.
Yeah.
You'll find that on YouTube. So by the end of this conversation, if you like Char and you want to listen to her talk about awakening and non-duality and no self-realization, then check out her channel. It's very good. Plus her thumbnails are like on point. So
Thanks.
they're quite good. Yeah. So Char, Violet told me you're or were or something like that, a student of Adyashanti or something to that effect.
Yeah, loosely speaking.
Yeah.
So I basically followed his work. So you could loosely say he was my teacher.
Uh-huh.
But it was more like I never met him or went to a retreat. Obviously, being in Australia, that's a bit difficult.
Yeah.
It would have been possible, but difficult. So, but yeah, I'd say he was my teacher for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's quite remarkable.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I usually often say he's like my favorite teacher or the best overall all around teacher I've seen. But
yeah, just so well rounded and just practical as well, not too like woo-woo-y, which really sort of suited me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I also resonate with him because he has a Zen background. So some of what he talks about, it kind of has that flavor, and so forth. So yeah.
Yeah. So he's one of my favorites too. I think that was Jeff Foster and Adyashanti were the first people you sent me to check out when we met. So,
yeah. I recommend Jeff's book, The Deepest Acceptance, pretty frequently. It's just really comes from an angle I've never seen anybody come from. So
have you heard of Jeff Foster? Sure.
I have, but didn't really sort of get into his work, but I do know of him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I read Adyashanti's Emptiness Dancing in the beginning, like pre-awakening, and I hadn't read it. And after this last retreat coming home, I read it. I listened to it. I listened to it again, and I'm like, my God, this book has a whole new meaning.
Isn't it funny? It's like a code.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, now I get it. And then you listen again, you're like, no, now I really get it. And just keeps going deeper. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, I've had that conversation with people several times where I mention Adyashanti and they'll say, "Oh, I looked at some of his stuff. I didn't really get it or something, or it wasn't to my liking." And I'll say, "Well, just wait a while and then look at it again later," because invariably when they look at it later on, especially after they've had some shifts in identity, all of a sudden you're like, "Oh, okay, got it." It's like so powerful, so potent. But I can see how the mind might not want to see that so much.
I was a bit like that with The Power of Now, like Eckhart Tolle's book. I read it in my 20s and just sort of felt the importance of it and didn't understand it at all. And then I think just this year I thought, I might just listen to that again. And I was like, this is such a good book. I had no idea how brilliant this teaching is.
Yeah.
Now that I can understand it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a powerful transmission. Like when I read The Power of Now, it's almost like there are just no words there. It's just a total conduit. It's like an open conduit to presence. It's that well written, I think.
Oh, it's brilliant.
And yeah, I think it probably is like, it probably plants seeds for a lot of people where they read it and like, I don't really know, I don't get it, but then it clicks later, maybe down the road. For me, it was the Tao Te Ching, I think, that was kind of like that, where I read it young, maybe as a teenager. And something in me told me there was something there, like, but it was so opaque to me. I thought, this is 2,500 years old and it's a revered text. Yeah, I can't make sense of it. There's got to be something here, and now I read it and it's just the same. It's like so clear and obvious, but yeah, when the mind is so tight, there's like no gaps, somehow in thought, that things can be so opaque.
Not enough space for the true teaching to enter in with no gaps. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so much like belief in thought, like identity and belief in thought.
Mm-hmm.
Like even if it were to touch you when you're mind identified, or when you have a lot of belief in thought, identity and thought, then it still might be, it's most likely probably going to be translated into a something versus be really touch the gap between thought.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I remember growing up, like noticing thoughts crowding in my mind. I remember noticing thoughts coming and going, and then noticing when it felt solid, like it started to feel like there really were no gaps. But what I didn't notice was when the sense of me sort of was produced by that somehow. The sense of being a self in thought snuck up on me somehow. And it really wasn't until that awakening when I was 24 that it became really clear, like, wow, that's really binding. That's a really dense, like energetic cage, it was for me at least, that world of identification with not just individual thoughts, but the sense of being a thinker, the sense of being the one who's on a time scale, who's trying to get somewhere, who's trying not to get some, who's trying to make this happen and trying to avoid making that happen, or trying to feel better. Like it's so in the background that the sense of who I was like coming forward out of that. And I didn't even notice it until it took a critical hit. So, yeah.
Yeah, I felt completely unconscious. Like looking back now, I was like 100% in the story of Chars. I didn't doubt it for a second until I started waking up. Basically, it didn't even occur to me. I mean, I could feel something was off. That was about the only intuition, really.
Yeah.
But had no idea at all that I wasn't this character called Chars. Yeah, it's just totally in it, which was kind of beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's something almost romantic about being that mind identified. It's like has almost like a hyper real experience to it in a sense, but it's just a matter of conditions before that acts out of unconsciousness and in potentially violent ways as well. How did it start for you, Char? Or when did you first notice something was changing or different?
In my 20s, I was getting like the seeds, like you say, but really not getting it because I was so caught up in the story. So, I was reading like Eckhart Tolle's books and things like that. I even had a Buddhist nun, I think it was, just randomly give me a card that said oneness when I was out at a park once. And I was like, oh, this is important. I don't know what it means. I feel like I'm going to be helping people with this one day, but I don't even know what it means, and just kind of threw it out. So like the little seeds were getting planted, but it wasn't until I was 30 where I had a very, sort of bad experience with a business failing that I was very identified with. And it was, like people call the dark night, that kind of thing. But I really felt backed into a corner and felt like I had to kill myself in that moment. I just felt like I ran out of options and I didn't want to do it, but I felt like because I didn't understand awakening yet, I didn't see any other options. I thought that was it. I thought that was the end. And because I couldn't do it, luckily, something like died in that moment. And obviously looking back now, I can see that's where identity started to drop away, but how it felt was not good. It didn't feel spiritual and open. It felt depressed and like it was the end of my world. And so it was wonderful. And, I'm so grateful that all happened. But of course, at the time, it was really terrible trauma and a long road to even find my way to authentic awakening teachings. Probably still took me 6 years to find my way to Adya. So, I really just couldn't get it. I had no one in my world that knew about awakening. So I had no reference for it. I just didn't know. I just thought my life was a disaster, really. I just didn't get why other people seemed to be able to get life to work and I just couldn't. it's like I was building a life out of sand. It would just like dissolve again every time I tried anything. So it's kind of a relief when I found awakening, because it was like, oh, this is what's happening. I get it now. Like, it doesn't make it any easier, but now I understand why it's happening. So that was a relief.
That helps a lot to have a context for it. I mean, it makes a huge difference.
Huge.
Yeah, like when you said in my life, I just couldn't figure out how other people could get it sorted or get it together or make life work. And man, I can completely relate to that. Like, in one sense, I could get along day to day and do, I wasn't completely clueless, but there was nothing satisfying about it. It was deeply unsatisfying. And the more it went, the worse it got. So, as I try to gauge this for anyone listening, like, it's not a romanticized thing to go through this. It's often very brutal. And it's not awakening that's doing it to you. It's not awakening that's causing the suffering and pain. It's delusion, really, ultimately. But when you add to it that you can't structure a life successfully, and something feels like it's crumbling, and you feel lost and disoriented, and then sometimes you have no context for it at all. Like, you don't know that this is awakening. This is a natural process that can happen. It can be really difficult. So, and yet, that, for me at least, that complete and abject, I guess I would call it hopelessness. That really lit something, and I don't mean to sound like mystical or magical about it, but I can say in retrospect, things came to my aid. Not things I expected, like a breakup or a book just happened to be on the shelf or whatever it was, but there were things that were there, like that just lit up, and they're like, hey, pay attention to this. Somehow I knew that. I don't know how I knew that. So I kind of try to highlight that to people sometimes. It's like when you're really in that dark night, when life is not working at all. And, if you're listening to this, I guess you have some sense of it, but there's an instinct that something's starting to unfold or let go or dissolve, or the rug's being pulled. Maybe you can't do anything, but maybe you can just have some openness to like look around and see, just an openness to accept what's moving in your life, to let it move in your life. And then ultimately at some point to really let go into that. Those things seem to come together. Like there's a letting go. There's for me, I remember like the moment. It felt like truly a moment of like, it's time to just completely let go here. And I did, and it worked, so, but that's often not what you feel when you're in that experience. You feel like you want to try to grab onto something. You want to try to orient, until it just you realize there's no way anymore. Like that's how it felt for me. And sounds like what you went through as well.
Yeah, I didn't want awakening. So when I hear people, like Adia's story, that are seeking at 19 and just really yearning for truth and stuff, like I couldn't resonate with that part, because for me, I was just resisting it like crazy. I just wanted a normal life. I had no interest in anything else, but it was really being forced upon me is how it felt. And then I felt like I was a victim to awakening for a long time, which was very interesting as well, and was part of the unfolding for me to transition from being the victim of it to like actually really wanting it. So even that was a whole journey in itself. It was really fascinating.
That is. I've come across people who feel that way, often for whom it came upon them without them realizing what it was. And it's a kind of a hard thing to explain sometimes, but because your instinct is like, this happened to me. But it's like, if you just think back before that, like, was it ever really working, And also, nothing new comes with awakening. You just see what's already there. You see what's already there, but often hidden and obscured, and misperceptions and false beliefs and resistance patterns. Like, those were already there. Those aren't yours either. They're not like your fault, but awakening didn't give you those. It just uncovered them for you. But yeah, I know it can be a hard thing to like, except for, I was thinking back when you described this, I didn't know as such what awakening was. I wasn't like a spiritual seeker. I had heard about enlightenment. I had heard about Buddhism, but for me, it was very much intellectual. So I would have just categorized that in more of the same suffering. Everything was suffering. Like, so I never got any flavor of that until I did. And I think it was like, it happened once or twice where it was just a quick taste, and then I kind of forgot about it. But when I opened the book and I started reading through these passages of people who had literally broken through suffering in 3 Pillars of Zen, they were describing going through awakening in first person in very plain language. I was like, oh my God. I was like, that's it right there. I don't care if it kills me. I don't care if this body just dies off. I'm going there. I don't know what it is, but that's where I'm going, and that's how it felt to me. So I was all in once I tasted it, but I didn't taste it right almost until the end. It was probably a few days before awakening when I really saw like, oh, that's the path I'm going down. And it's completely letting go, because it's the one thing I hadn't tried.
Yeah, I resonate with that. The turning point for me from going from being a victim of it to being on board and then being fully into it was that I heard that it could end my suffering. That was what I needed to hear, which was part of Adya's teaching, I guess, that I was latching onto. And although it was really grasping at that, it worked, that really worked, and that drove it. And then it started to blossom into an absolute love affair with truth, which was just happened organically. But it did start with like okay, nothing else has worked. I might as well try this. Why not surrender to this? And it worked.
Oh, I love that.
I resonate so much to that, all of that parts of Chars' life. I think in some ways we have such similar stories. Like, life was just like, I was like, I'm just going to get married and do this last thing. And then that's going to be and it's like, even though I was a lot of unconscious, I really knew, I just knew that like, I didn't know it wasn't going to work, but I knew that there was something there that I was running from, that something that was like, always like, okay, well, when you're ready and you're done with all that shit, you can turn this direction. And I felt like for many years before even getting married that I felt that like energy there, but it terrified me. So I was like, no, I'm going to just try to get my life together again and have some normalcy, and we'll see what that goes. And then when that marriage broke up, it was like, okay, I've really tried everything. Like then, just life puts everything in the right place. It was like literally as soon as my depression was over from being like my husband leaving and separating and being really depressed and like, I have nothing. I met Angelo, and then he was like, that thing you're talking about, you can go there, you can trust that. And I really think for me, like awakening was sort of happening for a few years. I just had no context. I didn't know why. And I think that was sort of, it felt like, looking back now, it's like this force was trying to come through and put my life in the actual right direction, if there is one. But and I just kept going, nope, I want to do it my way. I want to do what I want. I want to have what I want to have. And so I kept negotiating with it for years, not even really knowing, but I kind of knew. And then when I got everything I wanted, I was like, okay, whatever you are, let's go on. And it was just such a perfect time to have the context, which was Angelo, to say, hey, here's some books, like this could be what you're going through, and you can trust it. And and then the same like eventually it sparked like, okay, this will end my suffering. And then that turning into like this like honoring and love for truth that I can't even put into words, that is just like taken over everything. So I relate to it a lot. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like that love for truth has now totally transformed into this like sensory absorption.
Yeah, that's how it feels. It's like it's emanating from everything. It's not a personal thing or a journey or anything. It's just emanating from fabric of reality. Everything. There's nothing's mundane.
Yeah.
I'm sort of experiencing it as a love for living, like the love for truth sort of morphed into a love for life or expressing life, or however you put it.
Yeah. Angelo says living truth a lot. I don't know where that came from originally, but that resonates for me here too with that part. Is like, feels like truth wants to be completely embodied, be completely lived. Yeah.
And then even the word truth just starts to lose its meaning, when I think now, like, well, what does that mean, truth? It's just
Yeah. I feel like it's more of a feeling than a meaning, you know. But
yeah, to me, it just becomes so paradoxical that the words really do fail, but there's some poetic words that maybe work, you know, like the Heart Sutra is probably as close as I can get. Form is emptiness.
yeah, or the affirming faith in mind. Have you heard of that one, Char? That one's so beautiful.
Powerful. Yeah.
Oh, I love that one. I'll send it to you. Angelo used to read it to me, like sometimes at lunch. He'd randomly say, "Do you want me to read you affirming faith in mind?" I'm like, "Yes, please," because I just love to be read to. And I just closed my eyes, and like in the beginning, I was like, I don't know what the heck this is talking about, but I felt like so much like love when I would listen to him read it. And then it just, over the years, he just randomly would just say, "Hey, do you want me to read affirming faith in mind?" I don't know how strategic that was on his part, but he just read it a few times, and each time it was like more and more true to me because I could understand it through experience. And then and it's really long. It's really long. It's like what, 6 pages or something, Ange?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
I can read it.
Yeah. And then the last year or 2 years reading it has just become like every line I'm like, yeah. So
yeah, really, I think it really talks about embodying the realization of no self, I would say. Or what goes beyond no self, because whatever walks out the other side is not a self, and the whole self structure and all of the implications of it and just fade, because the sun doesn't need a self, footstep doesn't need a self,
the dog,
flower, the dog, nothing needs a self, the universe. But and yet something sort of continues on, it would seem. So anyway, this is Xinxin Ming, affirming faith in mind. The great way is not difficult for those who do not pick and choose. When preferences are cast aside, the way stands clear and undisguised. But even slight distinctions made set heaven and earth far apart. If you would clearly see the truth, discard opinions pro and con. To founder in dislike and like is nothing but the mind's disease, and not to see the way's deep truth disturbs the mind's essential peace. The way is perfect like vast space, where there's no lack and no excess. Our choice to choose and to reject prevents our seeing the simple truth. Both striving for the outer world as well as for the inner void condemns us to entangled lives. Just calmly see that all is one, and by themselves false views will go. Attempts
Angelo?
Yes.
Can you slow down, please?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Well, it may be an hour if I slow down, because this is really long.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's all right. It's valuable.
Attempts to stop activity will fill you with activity. Remaining in duality, you'll never know of unity. And not to know this unity lets conflict lead you far astray. When you assert that things are real, you miss their true reality. But to assert that things are void also misses reality. The more you talk and think on this, the further from the truth you'll be. Cut off all useless thoughts and words, and there's nowhere you cannot go. Returning to the root itself, you'll find the meaning of all things. If you pursue appearances, you overlook the primal source. Awakening is to go beyond both emptiness as well as form. All changes in this empty world seem real because of ignorance. Do not go searching for the truth. Just let those fond opinions go. Abide not in duality. Refrain from all pursuit of it. If there's a trace of right and wrong, true mind is lost, confused, distraught. From one mind comes duality, but cling not even to this one. When this one mind rests undisturbed, then nothing in the world offends. And when no thing can give offense, then all obstructions cease to be. If all thought objects disappear, the thinking subject drops away. For things are things because of mind, and mind is mind because of things. These two are merely relative, and both, at source, are emptiness. In emptiness, these are not two, yet in each are contained all forms. Once coarse and fine are seen no more, then how can there be taking sides? The great way is without limit, beyond the easy and the hard. But those who hold to narrow views are fearful and irresolute. Their frantic haste just slows them down. If you're attached to anything, you surely will go far astray. Just let go now of clinging mind, and all things are just as they are. In essence, nothing goes or stays. See into the true nature of things, and you're in step with the great way, thus walking freely, undisturbed. But live in bondage to your thoughts, and you will be confused, unclear. The heavy burden just weighs you down, so why keep judging good and bad? If you would walk the highest way, do not reject the sense domain. For as it is whole and complete, this sense world is enlightenment. The wise do not strive after goals. The foolish put themselves in bonds. One way knows no differences. The foolish cling to this and that. To seek great mind with thinking mind is certainly a grave mistake. From small mind comes rest and unrest, but awakened mind transcends both. Delusion spawns dualities. These dreams are merely flowers of air. Why work so hard at grasping them? Both gain and loss, and right and wrong, once and for all get rid of them. When you no longer are asleep, all dreams will vanish by themselves. If mind does not discriminate, all things are as they are, as one. To go to this mysterious source frees us from all entanglements. When all is seen with equal mind, to our self-nature we return. This single mind goes right beyond all reasons and comparison. Seek movement and there's no movement. Seek rest and no rest comes instead. When rest and no rest cease to be, then even oneness disappears. This ultimate finality is beyond all laws, cannot be described. With single mind, one with the way, all ego-centered strivings cease. Doubts and confusion disappear, and so true faith pervades our life. There is no thing that clings to us, and nothing that is left behind. All's self-revealing, void, and clear, without exerting power of mind. Thought cannot reach this state of truth. Here, feelings are of no avail. In the true world of emptiness, both self and other are no more. To enter this true empty world, immediately affirm not two. In this not two, all is the same, with nothing separate or outside. The wise in all times and places awaken to this primal truth. The ways beyond all space, all time. One instant is 10,000 years. Not only here, not only there. Truths right before your very eyes. Distinctions such as large and small have relevance for you no more. The largest is the smallest too. Here limitations have no place. What is not, what is not is. If this is not yet clear to you, you're still far from the inner truth. One thing is all things are one. Know this, and all's whole and complete. When faith and mind are not separate, and not separate are mind and faith, this is beyond all words, all thought. For here there is no yesterday, no tomorrow, no today. Isn't that great?
Love that
Nice.
so much.
I love it.
I can really relate that to what I've been experiencing. It's really awesome.
I feel like that you could take like one, what is it called, like a segment of it or something, and just sort of like use that as your sort of pointer, right?
Mhm. Yeah, it's like a bunch of koans all together or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at those Basenji ears perfectly lined up back there. How cute.
Basenji girls. Hi, girls.
You should bring one of the Basenjis to the party.
Which party?
The party we're having.
Oh,
The Zoom party.
The Zoom party.
Mhm.
Hi. You're part of the party.
Oh my gosh, they're so adorable.
Oh,
Gamora Jean.
Leo's too much into the warm. Look at her face.
Yeah, she's all about the fireplace. She loves warmth. Look how huge she is. Oh my gosh.
Okay, puts her hands right here.
Hello, Gamora. Hi, Gamora.
Who's that?
It's Papa. She's looking for me. Hey, Kimora Jean.
Oh.
Kimora. Hi, baby girl. What you doing? You want me to come bring you a snack?
Fish.
I'm inside the computer. I'm inside the screen. She's adorable.
Down.
She's really smart. She watches TV. She can watch like a documentary on animals like continuously.
Cool.
Yeah, most recently we just found one show, but stories and it's come in and out like of interest, to have interest in TV show stories. And I'm like, oh, the last couple months I'm not really that interested. I'm interested in so I watch the animal shows and listen to the animals, and I guess that's my way of nature. But yeah, I just feel it feels so nice to just see them move. And so I feel like I resonate with how they move more than I resonate with how humans move.
They're so natural.
Yeah. Yeah. And just like instinctual too. Like, and I love to see like how they, the things that like on this path, some people think we're like, go away or I don't know what, but like, I don't know, you could just see they still have emotion, they still have primal emotion, and like protecting their spaces and stuff. Like it's interesting to me to see how that like primal dynamic plays out in an area with no self, right? Because it's like it plays out within us, it just gets so diluted by identity that something grabs a hold of it and makes it into this whole other thing. But like primally, there's a lot of instinctual things that are there without any identity.
I notice how they can move so quickly from deep stillness and quiet to activity, to vigorous activity and back. It's very easy for animals to do. Humans aren't good at that. Like the mind identified world is not like that. It's very unnatural in the way it maintains its energies. But a dog, will just lay there in sleep or deep samadhi, just, whatever, completely still for hours, and then jumps up and plays, runs around, eats, lays right back down. No problem. It's easy, to transition between environments and energetic sort of experiences.
Yeah. These guys do it a lot when they hear the squirrel, or they hear like this tiniest thing that I didn't even hear. And all of a sudden they're just like scurrying across the floor, like can't get there fast enough, sliding because it's a wood floor, It's so funny. I'm like, you guys, there's no like in between of like, oh, I noticed and I think maybe I should go outside and chase the squirrel right now. Like there's no none of that. It's just like on or off. Yeah.
And I think it points to the meaninglessness of it being so beautiful.
Yeah.
When we can hear about meaninglessness and even realize it for ourselves, it can be a shock, or if we've got parts that are a bit depressive or whatever, can grab hold of the meaninglessness and that sort of thing. But when we watch animals, we can see how, yeah, there's no meaning there, but look how much joy and fun and play there is. So it's like, sure, maybe there's no point to it, but who cares? Like, it's like, yeah, it's a beautiful teacher.
Yeah, you're right. I love that.
Meaning is a funny thing. I remember once someone was asking about meaning on a Lisa Carnes talk, and she goes, "Meaning sucks." The truth of it is, if you look at what meaning is or purpose, like, this might sound sarcastic, but this is kind of how it looks to me. Is it's kind of like saying, life is kind of like a pile of shit. So let me put some meaning on it. Let me make a mental thing about it that's not even true, so that I can like tell someone else how good it is or something. But it has nothing to do with anything. Like when there's just a continuous experience of presence, then you don't need to go into the imagination and make a meaning about anything. Why would you? Yeah.
Yeah, I found it quite shocking when this no self transition started about 9 months ago. That was one of the first things I noticed, was the overlay of meaning I'd put onto like everything, onto animals, onto humans, onto just unconsciously, just this overlay on, and just making it just whatever I wanted it to be, like that there was this deep connection there, or there was this relationship there, or there's just whatever it was. And to have that kind of just stripped away was shocking, but more just shocking that you can delude yourself that much.
Yeah.
So weird.
I think we don't realize how much meaning, when we put meaning on something or agree with someone else about the meaning of something, it's really for us. It's like, what does it mean to me? What is the purpose of that for me? What is the value of the relationship for me? We conveniently overlook that it's always pointing back to me. And well, once you see that that's not there, it really gets strange. But you also start to see like that self-centeredness is just not necessary in life. It's just not necessary. There can be just the exuberance of being alive without having to be special or different or apart from anything or have meaning or purpose or, being in your mind in any way at all. It can just be a natural dance of experience of appearance without pulling a self out of that or some subject out of that. It's just quite beautiful, really. It filters out quite a lot, that layer of meaning and self-centeredness or whatever.
And I find it to be a relief now as those layers drop away, which was sort of shocking to begin with. But now it's almost like, oh, the pressure's been taken off. Like I don't need to be responsible for this and try and create meaning out of this and try to create just anything out of something that's impossible to do the impossible task. Basically, the mind is trying to do an impossible task. So it's almost like, oh, can let go of that now. I don't have to do that. I can just play. I can just be, like, what a relief. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And everything does just fine by itself. The universe never needed our help, really. Right. And, but by looking through the paradigm that somehow it does, or life needs our whatever input or our struggle or our meaning, by looking through that paradigm, we actually cheat ourselves out of a huge bandwidth of experience. It's hard to talk about what that is because it is like form as emptiness, and emptiness is form, but it's incredible. It's incredible, it's ecstatic, really. And there's nothing required to know that.
Yeah. And there's so much more here without meaning or self.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like, talk about like, being able to finally enjoy life, but then like beyond that, it's like, there's just endless things here, endless, they're not things though, but I have to use language somehow, but it's, details. It feels like details, like endless details here, and yeah, I find myself so in love with that. Like, I think I always was to some extent, but it's like without a self there, it just gets so amplified. It's like looking through a magnifying glass, yet can still look out and big and see like peripheral and like the bigger picture, but yet it's like every little part of what's happening in the experience is included in that big picture, and not just like, I think mine identified for me was so like missing so much because I was so narrowed into like what I got to get from this situation, or what my mind is making of this situation, or what are they thinking of me, or in that I was missing so much that was here. And I think in that dynamic, it was like wanting, behind it is like I just wanted to be like okay being here and be accepted being here, but now it's just so obvious that there's not, it's like all the wholeness that the system really craved was already here. It's just in everything and not in one thing specific. Yeah, it's like there's more than enough. It's like the ultimate like sharing or something. Like there's just more than enough of life here. Yeah, and then just for context too, for people watching, like it's not just good either. It's dynamic in all the ways, the what we would call positive or bad or negative.
And it's like, on one hand, I can see why we would avoid feeling such intense presence. I can understand why, But on the other hand, it's almost like, well, why would I resist this as well? It's like, I can see both sides to like, why would I ever resist this? It's so, seems so strange that I put up such a fight to get to this point. And it's like, really, this is what I was resisting? Like, how odd.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, but I think that it's like of course you resisted that because it's so close. It's just experience, and that sense of something apart from experience is going to resist that, because I think in some way it intuitives energetically that if it gets closer to that experience, even though somebody might even say that that might be what you're really looking for, it's still like something in us, in the egoish part of us, knows that when I get close to that, there's going to be no more of me, because it's sort of like this gap closing of like experiencer and experience, and it closes, and then there's just pure experience, just experience. But then that means that I don't get to have anything that I want to have. That means that I don't get to do anything I want to do. And that goes back into what Angela was saying with the self-centeredness, but it's like, you can't, like, it sounds romantic. Like when I tell people that like what life wants for my life, which isn't something written down somewhere, it's just this moment to moment expression. What it wants to do through this body mind is far more right in some way than I could ever plan it or imagine it. Like just in the sense of that story, like I couldn't really get it. I couldn't get something that I would be able to settle in. But that it sounds romantic that like, okay, life's going to live through you, but it's actually a really dynamic shift. There's a lot, like radically letting go it's not an easy thing. I don't know if maybe for some people it is, but like you had said, Adya just got up from the couch and realized he didn't take himself with him. Char, but yeah, for me, it's been this like this shift, this like feels like a reorganization of of everything. Yeah.
That closeness, that really resonates with me. I remember when that was sort of clicking in and I began to experience that, however long ago that was, maybe a few months ago, and it was just like things were happening on top of me. It was like so intimate. It was frightening, not frightening, just like so intense that it was just like, it's all happening here and this here is nowhere. And that just to experience that actually like physically, just you adjust to it like anything, and then it just becomes normal. But just initially when that kind of switched on, it was just like everything's so close. It was like almost claustrophobic. It was really weird.
Yeah, I remember feeling that intensity really with the visual field mostly. Like when I was clarifying practice wise with the other senses, it wasn't like intimidating, maybe that's a good word for that, but when it was the visual field, I was like, ooh, whoa, hold on, and I could still feel like when it was merging, where it was like I just kind of like pull back just a little bit. But it was funny because it was actually in retreat where I realized, oh, I'm reacting to like what I think is happening here versus what's actually happening here. And when I could see that, then it was like felt natural to sort of just lean in, because there's where else am I going to lean, So.
Yeah, once you realize that you're just fighting the mind's idea of what the space was, for me that was like the collapse of space, was that coming in on me feeling. But it's like once you realize, well, that was only ever an idea, that was just illusion anyway, this is how it has always been, you're just experiencing it directly now, and then it's kind of like, okay, well, it is what it is, and you just sort of carry on, I guess.
Yeah, totally.
I think that's how it is, like all the way along the line, where it can feel like the shifts in perception are intense or whatever, or we can like recoil sometimes, but exactly what you said, where all we're really recoiling from is the dispelling of an illusion that we were just attached to. We were just attached to the idea that there's a subject here and there's objects out there, and all of a sudden it's like, nope, that's not the case. There's no out there. It's like all right here. And that can, the mind's version of it would be like, oh, that's claustrophobic, it's suffocating, like there's no distance, whoa, this is overload. And then you go, well, that's just a reaction to the previous belief that there's like distance and space, and there clearly isn't. So, yeah. We get attached to illusions. We get attached to like,
totally.
The illusions.
Yeah. And that part's been so fascinating to me. That's just seeing so clearly how a thought refers to a thought refers to a thought, but there isn't anything actual it refers to. Like there's not anything outside of thought that any of those thoughts refer to. That is like so cool.
Mm.
You know, I'm like, okay, well, what's behind that one? Oh, another thought, another like, and I feel like the mind is like this thought suggestion generator. It's like you're talking to two other people right now on Zoom, and it's like, oh yeah, that's a nice suggestion, but is that what's really happening here? I don't know, you know. Um, like I used to think of it as a reflection. I think in some ways it is a reflection, but like it feels like it like tries to implement, it's like tries to put something on top of it, and like it's like that filter. It's like, here's what's happening here, and it's like, okay, but is that what's happening here? You know, like that's referring, that thought, here's what's happening here, is referring to an assumptions, which are other thoughts. Assumption that there's people, there's more than one person, there's subject object, all of those like billions of assumptions that support this one filter overlay that says whatever it says, you know. And like to see that is so, it's just really cool. Like I think that's really, to see it is really cool, because it's like, wow, the whole thing that I thought was my life and my path with spirituality and my whole deal about me or about life and others was this whole thing based on like some basic assumptions of identity. One, that I'm separate someone in here, and that there's separate people in there, and there's subject object, and there's even a world here. Let's not get too crazy, you know, but that all those assumptions support all of these overlays that like endlessly are like, here's what's happening, here's what you're doing now, here's what's next, here's what that feels like, here's what's that. And I'm like, wow, to see that whole thing crumble is just like fascinating.
It is. It is. The thing about reflection is interesting too. Like the idea that the mind reflects,
Something
it tries to reflect what seems to be there, but because of the reflecting nature, it adds a lot that's not there, like solidity, perpetuity, self, separation, subject object, the most basic separation, form, that there could even be form at all, that there's a world.
Yeah.
And then when that inner world goes, like when the subtle self-sense collapses and there's literally no inner world, like it's seen, there's just no inner world. There's nowhere for that to occur, which is, I think, simultaneously seeing that reflective nature of thought, like thought after thought after thought, one kind of recalling another, but there's no evidence that that's even referring to anything at all or ever was. That in one sense, it's a huge adjustment, but in another sense, it's like there's nothing to adjust because there was never anyone for whom that referred. It's kind of a joke. It's like a cosmic joke. And I think sometimes the struggle with that, like Ninth Fetter basically, is like
a rude joke. It's very rude.
Yeah, but the joke is like, not the joke, but the struggle sometimes is like wanting to look back into where the self never was to try to find out what happened to the self, and then realizing there's no one that can even do that. It's just like a very subtle tendency, but at this level, very subtle things feel really, I don't know, discordant or something. But I think that's why the word restlessness works, like the energetic restlessness, because it's a completely impersonal experience. And yet the sense of trying to turn back into a person or turn back into an inner world and just not finding it can be challenging, you know, when it happens. But it naturally, I think, just subsides over time, or significantly subsides, because there's just nowhere for that to happen. It's like you can see the roots of suffering now.
Yeah, totally. I would, yeah, I think like, let's open that can of worms, because I think that's a really good point. Just briefly, where do you think, which fetter do you think that part is that we're talking about?
That's
Considering the fetter.
Ninth Fetter.
Ninth Fetter. Okay. How many is there? I just
10.
started reading that stuff, so I'm curious about it. Yeah, so 10.
Yeah, 10. The Ninth Fetter is energetic restlessness, or restlessness, it's called.
Yeah.
And that's completely exposed after the self structure falls out, which is the eighth fetter. And so
how does that manifest? Is that like manifest in the body? Mostly?
Yeah, for sure. In the body, and just a general sense of like something's not right with this, or like something wants to resist. It's like raw resistance, or it can be like a raw resistance, but very clearly seeing there's no one to resist it at all anymore. And that can, again, create this like struggle, or this like some kind of, whatever. To me, that also it leads you directly to the 10th fetter immediately if you just look. And the looking is to see there's nothing you can do about it. That's the 10th fetter. The 10th fetter is the most fundamental sense of ignorance, is that you can actually make yourself feel better. That's how it all starts.
Love
is the things that there's any way to make things other than they are at all. And it's literally like impossible. But when there's a self structure operating, it can sure seem possible. Like we can convince ourselves of all kinds of things that we can do to make ourselves feel better, react to this, imagine that, create a 3-dimensional world where we can run away, or an inner world we can imagine ourselves. Like when all that's gone, all that's left is that subtle sense. And I think this is just my sort of feeling on it. I think it's that the energetic restlessness itself isn't anything wrong. There's nothing wrong there at all. What it actually is it's life force. It's the like impulse, the will to be, the impulse of life force, and the what makes it feel like resistance, or what makes it feel like not reactivity, but that restlessness is just that subtle misperception of what its nature is. That there's some, and it's a remnant of self. It's the remnant of that will of the self, and it just naturally will subside, and it subsides rather quickly because there's nothing to keep it going anymore. But it's also intense.
In mind, meaning like there's no like fuel of mind or belief in mind at all to keep it going.
There's no sense that there's a self that's going to quote unquote fix a problem or even believe in a problem. It's just it's an instinctual feeling of like, restlessness is the word, I suppose.
Well, and then Ange, if that's going to get worked out, I think this is sort of, I think we talked about this maybe a year ago or something to some extent. If that restlessness is going to get worked out, it's condition based, right? Like it needs the physicality, the condition to arise, for it to come to the surface, to be seen, or whatever.
I think largely that's true. I think there are probably subtle inquiries that can be helpful still. But it's more like just seeing what it ever was that was the impetus to construct that inner world in the first place. And this can go way back to like early childhood, like the feeling of helplessness or defense, like some kind of internal defense. And there's some sense of someone trying to reify or reconstruct that inner world. If that tendency's there, seeing why it's there can be helpful. Like, oh, that's the place I used to go when I was abused, or that's the place I used to go when I was like in a situation that was completely unsafe around adults or something like that. Seeing that's what that was used for in the first place sometimes can just soften it, because you're kind of seeing the underlying, because I really do believe it's still belief-based. Ultimately, it's some kind of belief or really subtle perception that can still be operating. And that, again, that gets corrected with the 10th fetter, essentially. That's to rectify the situation, to see that things are just the way they are. They've always been just as they are. There's no way for them to be other than they are. And that's it. There's nothing that needs to do anything about that, nor could there be anything that could do anything about that. Yeah.
I've been experiencing this as, assuming it's what you're talking about, just where the mind just tried to use any strategy that's just left there to try and put anything back together. And it doesn't even really care what it is, but just any attempt, like a desperate attempt to form some type of solidity or self, and then each time failing, basically. And it's almost like the strategy is dissolved. I don't know if this is true, but it feels like the strategy is dissolved by trying to come back into a subtle form, not being able to attach or form into anything, and then realizing that it's hopeless, basically, that it can't, and so it's like each strategy arises, is unable to do anything, and then it kind of goes, and it's just led to this feeling of just defeat, basically, like there's just nothing I can do, there's nothing I can hold on to, there's just nothing in any way, outwardly, inwardly, like there's nothing, and it not even a place of like sadness anymore, just more like, oh that's right,
that's right. That's the 10th fetter, which is the term is ignorance, but that's the fetter that gets broken. And when you realize that's right, that's exactly right. So what I wanted to say as you were saying that is, I think that's exactly what that is. And seeing that there's nothing that can reconstruct any self. There's nothing that can really do anything about anything. And then the underlying question or inquiry could be something like, but is that even needed? Was it ever needed? Right.
Is it ever needed to do anything about this? Anything.
Yeah. And then you see that the anything or the this that needs anything to do about it is actually causally related to the sense that there's something that can be done about it. And yeah, but it is very much that kind of like binary experience where it's either something feels like it's just struggling against nothing and it's not you, it's just there. And then all of a sudden it's just gone and everything's just completely flow, you know, like that's what I've been watching Violet go through, kind of mostly not in that contracted, or not necessarily contracted, but that restless phase, but mostly in presence phase. But that you don't notice as much because it's just flow and it's so empty in one sense. But like, yeah, you're since 3 months ago or 2 months, whatever it was, like the amount of clarity and like unconditional love and presence and simplicity that has been like nothing I've ever seen. But it is punctuated by those contractions, like, you know, obviously, like yesterday.
Totally. Yeah. And I feel like I'm right there with what Char's saying. Like it's been I think it's been such great friendship for us both that's been developed in the newest few weeks or something, because we're kind of really at the same place in a lot of ways. And yeah, it feels the same. It feels like there's something that just tries to, Angela said it the best way. It feels like that. I love that context. I didn't have that before, but like tries to just like make something out of nothing, and it just keeps it feels like sand is in your hand and it drips. You made the analogy of the sand and then it just keeps collapsing, but to me it's like sand's in my hand and there's something that like kind of wants to hold on to it but doesn't want to hold on to it, but it's like and it's like it just slips through. It's just like, oh, there's nothing there. Or like my hand clenches and then I go, okay, what's in the hand? And then I'm like, nothing there, because the sand falls like right through the hand, you know? And it's sort of, it feels like for me on a body level, it's in this state of like contracting and expanding a little bit. And maybe that's part of like what's going on in the 9th and 10th Fetter stuff, which is Angela frozen?
Am I frozen?
Oh.
I was just about to turn into Wanda, but you broke the spell.
Oh shit. But yeah, it's fascinating. Like, oh, yeah, it's really interesting. It's really interesting to see that. And but I like that inquiry too. Like, I think that's the part that I need to put more into. I need to put more into implement. But it sounds like something that resonates to at least help support its movement, whatever it's trying to do. With looking into the fetters, and I think that's why I find a lot of interest in the fetters right now.
Christiana Meckelberger talked about this a lot, because for her, right after the 8th Fetter, she's written about this several times. It was like really, really, really rough for her. And for some people, it's not like literally just not at all. And other people, it's like super rough. For her, it was really rough for like quite a while. I think for a while.
How long was that?
I don't know actually, but I just remember her talking about it. She said she started a Facebook group just so she wouldn't bug her teacher so much. She could talk about it. But obviously it's settled. But for her, it was something about childhood and stuff. And you know, you can read up on her stuff. I want to actually after I interview Kevin, I want to interview her, and I think that'd be a really good thing to talk about, because she's got a lot of experience with that, having gone through it.
Well, that makes sense, because what's going on with me seems quite interesting, is that like body, like trauma that's still stored in the body is coming up, that Char and I've been discussing, like how interesting for that to come up now at this point, even after so much work, you know, for these like subtle forms. It feels like this like subtleties of remnants of trauma that was left in the body that literally needs to be like shaken out, danced out, you know. And yeah, so I'm gonna have to look at Christiane's stuff, because that was the one. Is that the one that you read to me when this shift was happening in last retreat? You read to me that morning, something she wrote?
Maybe, yeah. I referenced her, but it may have been what Thesa wrote.
What wrote?
Thesa wrote.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, what Thesa wrote. You read both, I think.
Yeah.
Do you know which one that would be from Christiane's? Because that might be good to find.
I can't remember. I could probably look through her stuff, or you could.
Okay, yeah, it was probably on Facebook. But yeah, that's interesting, because that's what it feels. It feels like it's moving into this like complete working out anything on a cellular level, on the body level.
I think also somatic work's really important too, though. Like the Awakening to Reality guys talk about like energy imbalances. I think that's what they would call, they would call energy imbalances.
Okay.
They just
That makes
refer
sense.
to it that way, but like TRE, yoga, dance, like anything that's physical and,
Mm-hmm.
remyelinating the vagus nerve or whatever could be helpful potentially.
Yeah.
But for me, it was craniosacral. I had never done it before, and my mentor recommended it when I started this shift earlier in the year. And because I just had some contractions like in the neck and stuff, just some patterns of holding on. And there were no stories or no trauma. I'd worked through all of that, but it was just like literally just the contraction. And so the craniosacral really helped in just letting that go, and it just allowed everything to sort of just flow more easily.
Very cool.
What
I've heard
is
a lot
that,
of good
Chars?
stuff about that.
The craniosacral, what is that specifically?
They use, I don't really understand it, something about the cranial nerves. So it's to do with the nervous system. It's a very gentle, like almost like a Reiki kind of energy healing is kind of how it feels, but they have a lot of knowledge to do with the nervous system. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
My sister told me about this. I don't know if you were there. We were playing cards once and she said, and my sister is pretty like skeptical about like spiritual stuff or even like healing modalities and things, but she had really bad, I think it was like SI joint pain. It was something in her lower back. It was like really bad pain for months and maybe over a year. And she tried different things and nothing was working. And someone suggested craniosacral. And she said she went in, sat on the table. They like touched her head. She said they just did a few things and I thought they were just starting. And they're like, okay, you're done. She was like, well, that was a ripoff. And then she said, I got up and left and it was gone. And she goes, it literally never came back. And she said, I don't know why it worked, but it worked and worked like right away for her. So since then, I've been pretty intrigued.
Yeah, I'll have to try it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mine is, it's just so apparent. My nervous system is just a wreck. It's just been conditioned so much through trauma that it needs some adjustment for sure.
Yeah, my sister, I'll ask her and we can find out where that is. That would be interesting to try it out.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. What was
So
the
Char,
other thing?
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so Char, if people want to like contact you and work with you one-on-one, you still have room for that?
I do at the moment.
So far, so good. Okay. And what I can do is put that link under this video.
Okay, cool.
For people. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Violet.
Oh, it's okay. No worries. I think that's great. We should probably do that at the end to some extent, at least give her her website name, Chars' website name. But I was going to say, there was something that I was like, put a pin in that and let's open that can of worms in a minute. It was the root of suffering. Yeah, let's put that. I think that would be really interesting to chat about. I don't have anything specific to say, but I'm sure if someone else
Roots of suffering.
Yeah.
I don't know. For me, when suffering essentially ended for me, it kind of happened in layers, but it's not as if I'm not aware of what causes suffering, but I'm more like, especially when I'm working with somebody who's waking up, that's when it's really obvious to me. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. It's like, I remember it. I remember, oh, that's how that belief hooked up to that. And it's connected to that sensation in your body. Mm-hmm. That feels like suffering to a self that's trying to make itself feel better. Like it just is really clear. But I think that this territory we're talking about is where that really becomes clear. At least I think it was for me.
Yeah.
Is in one sense just going through it in such a physical, direct way. It unhooks it at the root, because in one sense, all perceptions are rooted in sensation, I would say. Generally, conditioning is rooted in what we call body sensation. I think that's what it seems to be. It doesn't mean it's actually there. Conditioning doesn't live there or anything like that. It gets habituated with thoughts, with the way the mind functions, to certain patterns of belief, understanding, and resistance. And it's ultimately anchored somewhere in the sensations. When the self structure goes, then there's nothing to continue to anchor it into those sensations anymore.
Yeah.
But there can still be either an anchoring tendency or an avoidant tendency based on that old paradigm or based on the habits. And it's just a habit. It's literally an unconscious habit. It's not conscious or unconscious. It's a habit that we never actually chose. And it's not actually based on a self. It's just been there. And the self has been keeping keeping the reconnecting of the belief systems and so forth into those sensations going forever. And when it's not there and that stops happening, it will naturally dissipate and unhook. But you also have the opportunity to just see, oh, I see how that's hooked up now. I see how that was hooked up. And then the benefit of that isn't really for you. And you don't need a benefit now. Now it's just a natural unfolding of the whole, realization just carrying itself forward. But the benefit is to others ultimately, is so that you can be right there with someone else, feel what they're feeling, because there's not a separation, and you can feel how that's hooked up, or you can feel how those roots of suffering are in there. Yeah.
Yeah. And
that's my experience.
You almost don't have access to the root with a self, with the filter of self. Or you go deep, you can go deep. And I feel like I went deeper and deeper with this kind of stuff and noticed more and more the like habitual patterns and beliefs behind them more and more. But like, this is beyond, like, you can't go there with, like, it's like you don't cross that line with a self at all. You just don't have access to it.
I agree.
That's what it feels like.
The closest you can get is to suffer, to get to be in your own suffering and just sit with it. And that's great. But when the self falls, like, even that deconstructs, like, what suffering even is, how it ever even was perceived as suffering, all of that. And that's at an energetic level, I think.
Because I'm just, as you're speaking, trying to think, like, I don't even understand what it is anymore, which is so hilarious, because it was just like the main part of this life, this character. It was like, how do I not know? How can I not access that now? And I can access it when I work with people. I'm like, I can recognize it. I can't feel it, but I can recognize, oh, that's it there. But it's like, as time goes on, you do forget. It's weird, and it's a little bit hard to understand it, because you just can't quite grab what that really was. But I feel like maybe in this stage of the no self integration phase, or whatever it is I'm going through, it's almost like you can feel difficult emotions or whatever as the processing and the stuff happens, but because there's absolutely no resistance to anything, and there's such a willingness to dive in and embrace it, like, that's why there's no suffering for me anyway. It's because there's no resistance. So it's almost like it's always was the resistance that was the suffering. It's sort of like you kind of see that that's what was happening all along. And when you can no longer resist, then you can no longer struggle. So you can still feel difficult pain or emotion or whatever, but you're not fighting against it. And so it's like, so you're not suffering. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's right on the money. I'm with you there. It's like, I try not to say it too much, but like that I forgot what it's like to have a self or to be a self or whatever, because that's, first of all, it sounds weird to say that, but I am aware of it when I'm talking with someone, and it's the fact that it's not there, and yet it seems to be functioning so strongly, that stands out. Like it's just like, whoa, when I'm working directly with someone. It's not like I walk around noticing this in people or anything, but I do have to remind myself sometimes, okay, that's how people think. They think like, I'm a person, I'm in time. This is how my life's going right now. It's been going this way for a while. And it's because of that, like, remembering that, like, that's how the mind keeps telling itself that story, to keep it to hold it together, and it's so funny because if you just look closely, like, there's no magic trick to working with someone who's waking up. That the magic trick is just seeing clearly, because if you see clearly enough, you're going to see there's really nothing there. There never has been. And there's not structure, there's not duality or solidity or boundaries or any of it. Doesn't mean there's nothing there. It's not that doesn't mean there's something called nothing either, because that's even a position. But somehow just that willingness, and that's why the number 1, 2, and 3 thing required for someone to go through this process is they have to be generally somewhat willing to go, once it's happening. If I'm working with somebody, that's what I feel is like, if they're willing and they want to look, even if it's hesitantly and, and they're nervous and disoriented, but they still have some willingness to look, it's good. We're all good. Like that, because you will see it sooner or later. You'll see it layer by layer, or you'll see it all at once, but the truth can't be hidden. Like it's just there, reality is such a good teacher.
Yeah. And it's also, what's coming up for me is that that resistance that Char was talking about, when that resistance isn't there, it's like this seemed to be so for so long that resisting was me. Like I was the thing that resisting. I was the thing in control of like if I liked it or if I didn't like it. So it's like it seems like resistance is like something that's happening in the energetic system and in the mind, you could say, but then there's like seems to be some overlay, which is just kind of like scratch your head weird. Like what is it that even seemed to believe that? That was like in that poem that I wrote after No Self, that made that line just sticks to me. And it's like, what is it that even seemed to believe all of that? Like it's just bizarre, you know. But it's like that resistance that feels like me. So without the resistance, there's just what is, which can be anything, you know, can be absolutely anything. But it's like beyond willingness, you know. I love what Angela was saying about willingness and throughout the path, but like at this part of it, it's like beyond willingness. It's just like it has to be seen, kind of. It's like it's like so forceful, like there's like a very like so much less identity there, if any at all. And then this is like so forceful. I often talk about in the beginning, like the ego self kind of being in the foreground and your true nature being in the background, what the truth is of what's going on being in the background for so long. And then as you begin to awaken, it starts to like do this flip where now like truth is in the foreground and ego is still structured in the background. And then through No Self, it's like those two things collapse into one another. And then there's just here-ness, there's just this. But it when this has so much, like this is actually way more powerful than the ego, the essence, the life force. But when it's behind, when it's in the background, it's not as powerful. It's the ego is like very momentum, you know, a lot of momentum. But when that switches and then there's still a little bit of ego there, like trying to push or pull of it or try to get through it, it's like that's where like you realize like the most painful almost parts of the path is like when there's still ego trying to grasp and do something, when it's like it really is like all a speck of sand at that point, you know. So for that to collapse is so like, it's so beautiful. Them to just collapse to being like just this, you know. The other way I would describe it is like subject object, and it's like it just ends up being this, which isn't a subject or an object or not any of that, or you know, it just defies language completely at that point. But you do get to see when that two, what seems like two, collapses into one another, you get to see like what was it that, I don't know, it just becomes clear, the roots of suffering. It becomes clear like when you could see like, oh, like my behavior isn't like that anymore in this situation. I don't do that anymore. But I could see why I used to do it. But when I did it, I couldn't see why I did it. Like for me, it was like this coming back from the No Self retreat, which is what it was for me. I could see that like this whole house, I had so much things, I had so much clutter everywhere. And Angela saw this part of me. I went through this process of like decluttering and getting rid of a lot of stuff and everything. And it was like, oh my God, and it was so emotional. And it was weird because it was like, I could see this, what seemed like a person living in this household, buying stuff for years after years, was like, that was her coping mechanisms. That was way she coped, by like putting stuff around her so she would be grounded, so she was safe. And but like, bless her heart, like she needed that. That was a very valuable development in the relative part of her life. But then what like she didn't realize that while it was happening was how lonely inside she actually was, that she didn't have any, she wasn't in touch with, you know. And now like, I'm like, oh, that's why it was like that. And now it's like, now I have the like ability to feel that, what she couldn't feel when it was all going on, you know. And that to me is like a huge gift, because it's like, it was never her pain anyways, and why she was behaving that way. It's the pain of the world. It's the conscious pain that we all share. So now to have the ability to have more of an empty system of self, empty of identity, to be able to feel truly, like feel the roots of suffering, you know, like give it a home inside my being, inside my body, is like, it's a huge gift, you know. And like that just was not available at all before, not to this extent, at least, I would say.
I remember years ago, after this, these shifts for me, strangely enough, I was sitting in like a room with a bunch of TM people, like we were learning a mantra or something, but it was just hitting me like the reason we don't, it hit me this way. The reason we don't wake up is because the power of unconditional love is so powerful that it's actually terrifying, because you realize you have no will. Like your will is just burned up, like, like piece of newspaper thrown into the fire by the power of unconditional love, but you have no idea what it's going to do with your life. And you can't know, and that's intimidating. But turns out to be really good news. It turns out to be the best possible way things could go, really, for all involved, not just for you.
I found that part to be not so difficult for me personally, I guess you could say, just because my life had just been so difficult. I was almost just like, I was just so willing to give that up, I guess. So that's one of the perks of having such challenge, I guess. But I see that if you had anything going, anything to hang on to at all, that would make that part more difficult.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Just crossed my mind, Char, that the dogs didn't bark. Your dog didn't bark yet.
Oh, amazing.
All right. I'm getting to the end of my time frame here.
Okay. Yeah. No worries. Great chat.
Well, thanks everyone for coming. And Char, if you want to just send me, or you can just say it, your website or anything, people can get a hold of you.
Yeah, it's just charawakening.com. I'm easy to find. Yeah.
Simple. I love it.
Yeah.
charawakening.com. Okay. And we'll put it under the video as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Nice
Cool.
chat, you guys. Thank you guys. This was great.
We'll have to do it again.
Yeah.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
See ya.
Bye.